Hi, hello. Today we're going to be talking about honkai star rail and autism. To preface this video, I am autistic. I'm going to be speaking from my experiences, and our experiences may be different if you're autistic. Autism is a spectrum. It is a huge plethora of different experiences, and I'm going to be speaking from mine, and it may not match yours, and that's okay. Leave your comments below about your experiences with autism, you know? Okay. If for some reason you're watching this video and you don't know, Honkai Star Rail is a turn-based game created by Hoyoverse, the creators of Genshin Impact, Honkai Impact 3rd, Tears of Themis, and Zenless Zone Zero, among other games. In this game, you play as the Trailblazer, also known as Kalis or Stel, and you join this ragtag group of individuals called the Astro Express and go from planet to planet solving crises that the planets have going on. Usually involving a Stellaron, but not most of the times involving a Stellaron. All the time so far, but I'm saying most because we don't know what the future holds. Now, I'm making this video because throughout playing this game, I've realized a lot of characters display traits that are autistic. Before you say it, I'm not diagnosing a character. I'm not going to be saying X character is autistic. I'm going to be talking about traits of autism and showing where they have it, like what characters have what traits of autism, okay? So let's start off and talk about autism. Autism, also called Autism Spectrum Disorder, ASD, or Autism Spectrum Condition, ASC, is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by symptoms of deficient reciprocal social communication and the presence of restricted, repetitive, and inflexible patterns of behavior that are impairing in multiple contexts and excessive or atypical to be developmentally and socioculturally inappropriate. Other common signs include difficulty with social interaction, verbal and nonverbal communication, along with preservative interests, like preservative interests, stereotypic body movements, rigid routines, and hyper or hypo-reactivity to sensory input. I'm going to mostly be pulling from my experience as an autistic person. Now, our experiences may be completely different. I'm not speaking for everyone who's autistic. I don't want to speak for everyone who's autistic. But these are just my personal experiences and research. I did some research. So autism and Honkai Star Rail. Autism is mentioned a couple times in Honkai Star Rail. The first time in Penacony, where you meet Emma, Andy, Carol, and Gary, 4 children who Robin taught to sing.
And as for Gary, he's been living with autism since he was a child. They're not old enough to enter the sweet dream managed by the family. If we compare people to birds, these kids are like fledglings with impaired wings. But in this dream, well, they can fly freely. Even if they stumble along the way, well, they're still relying on their own strength. And me, an old lady with no legs. Well, without this dream, I couldn't even walk toward them.
I'm glad that you found a new life here in Penacony. It's just...
Don't worry, Robin. Dreams have their significance, but they aren't everything. Both the children and I understand this. No matter how long we fly through this dream, we will one day return to reality. But you know what? Emma and Gary aren't plagued by their insecurities anymore. No, and Carol is learning how to cope with her blindness. And Andy is livelier than ever. Well, even I've become more optimistic. You see, in dreams, we learn how to live. Once we return to reality, we learn how to survive.
The kid's caretaker, Grace, says, quote unquote, and as for Gary, he's been living with autism since he was a child. Now, when I first saw that, I wasn't sure about how I felt. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. I wasn't sure I liked the wording of it. To me, it almost implied that autism is something so bad that they need to escape it in the dreams of Penacony. Grace goes on to say, quote unquote, these kids are like fledglings with impaired wings, but in this dream they can fly free. So again, it kind of reinforced that idea that autism is something that holds you back, like an issue, basically. But Grace continues speaking about the kids, saying, Emma and Gary aren't plagued by their insecurities anymore. So in my opinion, rather than stating that autism is the issue, it's saying that the insecurities caused by autistic traits in a neurotypical world is what's causing the issue, not autism itself. And it's kind of saying that Gary struggled to fit in a neurotypical world, but being in the dream gave him the opportunity to work on those insecurities. The second mention of autism is in a post about the Genius Society, stating, quote unquote, "There are those who claim that the Genius Society is made up of oddballs, madmen, lone wolves, geniuses with autistic tendencies, and those with social challenges. They continually produce astonishing discoveries, yet the world at large remains ignorant of that." Before we jump into the Genius Society, because they're going to be the first people we're talking about, I want to talk about a trope with autism that really comes into play with the Genius Society. So, Savant syndrome. Savant syndrome is a phenomenon where someone demonstrates exceptional aptitude in one domain, such as art or mathematics, despite significant social or intellectual impairment. Some examples of savant skills include performing rapid mental calculations, playing lengthy musical compositions from memory, and repairing complex mechanisms without training. Savant syndrome is a real thing, but it only affects like 1% of people and 10% of autistic people. There's this trope in fiction that all autistic characters have this like savant, are super smart, and the autistic savant trope, which is a stereotype that portrays people with autism as having exceptional abilities in a specific area, such as math or music, while simultaneously portraying them as being socially awkward and lacking in other areas. This trope would continue to be perpetuated in film and television for decades to come and still is prevalent today. In fiction, most autistic people seem to be skilled or gifted, almost superhuman level of gifted, which is obviously a harmful stereotype because it infers that if you're not gifted as an autistic person, you're not like good enough. It sends the message that to be accepted with autism in a neurotypical world, you have to be twice as good, which is not the case. You're good how you are. You're amazing. Most members of the Genius Society would be considered savant. I mean, they're literal geniuses. We'll get more to their accomplishments later on as we talk about them. I will try and disregard the savantness of them while talking about them and try to only focus on the traits that aren't involved in savantness, you know? Okay, let's start with the first Genius Society we meet in the game, and that is Herta.
I've only been gone, what, a few months? And the space station is already in this state?
Welcome back, Herta. This is the true master of the space station, Genius Society number 83, Herta.
At least give me a proper introduction. Genius Society number 83? Of all my outstanding achievements, that's what you want to mention?
Herta is a lot of the times overlooked, but she's one of my favorite characters in Honkai Star Rail. Or she has become my favorite as I've researched this. I didn't even realize until I did this research, but Herta's an emanator, like Acheron, which is crazy, right? But the thing is, we've only met Herta's puppet. We've never met her in the flesh. Flesh is a weird word, why did I say that? I don't know if we ever will meet her, but I assume if we do meet her again, or if we actually meet her in person, it's gonna be a 5-star character, and I'm so excited for that. But yeah, Herta's an emanator. Isn't that fucking crazy? We first meet Herta early on in the game in her space station. It is her space station, the Herta space station. So that's one of her achievements among a lot of others. The Herta we meet is a puppet. We have yet to meet the real Herta, though we are talking to the real Herta. Like, Herta's personality is her personality, and it's kind of easy to pick up on some of her issues with socializing. And I say sort of easy, but for me personally, it was actually not that easy to pick up on these things. I had to go back through and watch it over and over again just to like pick up on the parts that are socially incorrect, because I am bad with the social stuff. Very bad. Herta and Himiko are talking about the Trailblazer. You could tell Herta is blunt. She gets to the point, even if the way she speaks could be considered offensive. Like throughout this conversation, when Trailblazer mentions something that's bothering them, I guess, Herta goes, "You can leave." It's just kind of disregarding them. She also mentions how she wants to observe Trailblazer, but if she gets bored, she may just drop the whole thing and he could be kicked out of the space station. When Trailblazer says she's self-centered, Herta goes on to say that we should meet the other members of the Genius Society and that she has her honesty going on for her.
You should meet the others of the Genius Society. Some of them will trick you into thanking them after they milk you dry. At least I have my honesty going for me.
This really hit home for me personally because I feel my honesty is usually looked at in a negative way. I always say I'm tragically honest because my honesty, like, it tends to be more blunt and less sugar-coated, and I don't mean for it to be like that, but it just is. I am like that. I feel like Herta is like that too. She's honest and to the point. She doesn't really notice those social nuances that some people do or that neurotypical people expect us to notice. And that's why some of what she says is not really taken in the best light. I was reading an article on truthfulness and autism, and it says, quote unquote, I've learned that most of the time neurotypical people don't really want honesty. They want curated honesty. They don't want the first thoughts that come into your head. They want a rephrased nice version, which to me changes the interpretation of those real thoughts. So to me, that's not honesty. And with Herta, although she may be harsh, she does care. It's mentioned multiple times that Herta cares for people. It says, quote unquote, Madam Herta, you are so considerate. However, Herta is more generous and more understanding towards normal people like us. She leaves her handwritten drafts behind in random places around the space station with as much generosity as she allows researchers to study the curios she collected. To be frank, although Herta is one of the first characters we meet, we still don't know all that much about her. Hell, we don't even know what she really looks like. I think in time, when we learn more about her, this will be able to be addressed further or talked about further, but for now, we're leaving it at this. Also, another side note on Herta, you could also say her interests in research could be a special interest or a fixation. We'll talk more about those later. There's multiple points mentioned where it says Herta drops things out of the blue when she's not interested in them anymore, which could easily be a fixation that just kind of goes away, which is common amongst neurodivergent people. Ruan May.
I have a feeling we're on the right track.
I'll check the data when I get back.
Ruan May is a controversial character in Honkai Star Rail. Some people see her as cold or uncaring due to her story quest because of the way she treats her creations and how she recreated an emanator, that big blue bug thing. To be fair, when she meets us, she literally drugs us like so. This misconception that Ruan May is cold or emotionless kind of parallels a misconception that people have about autistic people, that we are cold or aloof, which will be brought up for other characters, but some people even think autistic people are emotionless, but that's far from the truth. Autistic people probably feel the most emotion and are very considerate of others. Quote unquote, I've been saying this ever since I did the Ruan May story. She's a fucking psychopath. I've been saying this ever since I did the Ruan May story. She's a fucking psychopath. I regret pulling for her and want her refunded, and I don't fucking understand how people still like her. Apparently, Miss Ruan May's personality isn't all that great. Ruan May is shown to be caring, though it's not a direct care. She does show to care about us at least a little bit, and to care about her creations, though she doesn't really understand that she cares. She says she can't explain love, and so she can't return their feelings, but at the same time, she does show compassion towards them, and by them I mean her experiments. I feel like her care is more rational in a sense. She says that they move her. So she is feeling some emotion towards them, and she shows a little bit of compassion towards them. Besides that, Ruan May talks quite a few times about masking. Now, masking is, quote unquote, a strategy used by some autistic people, consciously or unconsciously, to appear non-autistic in order to blend in and be more accepted in society. Ruan May says to mask your expression, because if you don't, you'll be full of weaknesses others can see. She also says, again, quote unquote, don't pry too much and keep your expressions in check. It seems like something she thinks about a lot, actually. So, Herta and Asta also mention how Ruan May prefers to be in solitude, saying she lives like a hermit. This could be due to her masking and feeling like she can't unmask unless she's alone. It could also be because of overstimulation, though the only line to insinuate this is Ruan May doesn't like fanfare and probably wouldn't appreciate a crowd to welcome her. Also, her special interest could be life forms because she almost constantly brings up life forms and life itself. Even when introduced to her, the first thing she does is touch us to take in the details of our biological existence.
Using touch to open my senses and letting the details of your biological existence flood into my brain.
And as for non-Genius Society members, we have Dr.ratio.
Here, a genius move. And how will you counter it? Only an idiot would ask such a question. Just move this here. You look distressed. Something the matter? If that's the case, you better get thinking.
Dr. Ratio is a character a lot of people headcanon as autistic. A lot of people. He fits a lot of the prior criteria that I've brought up. Like Herta, he's honest to a fault. Like Ruan May, he's mischaracterized by the fandom. His bust could be a metaphor for masking. Ratio, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting characters, though probably the hardest to pin down out of the characters that I chose for this video. Dr. Ratio is outwardly blunt and honest, which sometimes comes across as harsh or arrogant, so some of the fandom has characterized him as some like asshole. With all of his accomplishments, Ratio has the right to be arrogant. I mean, he has 8 PhDs and he quote unquote cured the king of diseases that I'm not gonna try and pronounce because this word is insane.
When he was still a young man, today's featured star obtained degrees in medicine, philosophy, natural theology, mathematics, physics, computer science, engineering, and biology.
The thing though is Dr. Ratio doesn't really see himself as better than others. If anything, he probably identifies more with his like shortcomings. Hell, he literally calls himself a mundanite, meaning ordinary or common. It's like mundane, but a person who is mundane. And if you don't know what mundane is, it's like ordinary, common. A mundane chore is doing the laundry or doing dishes. It's something ordinary and like not extraordinary or interesting. Though Ratio is honest, he's also very empathetic. He believes everyone has the right to education and believes anyone can learn to better themselves. That's why he became a teacher after being rejected by the Genius Society over and over. He says he wants to cure stupidity, but there's definitely more to his motives than that. I think this juxtaposition in Ratio's appearance and how he actually is what makes his character really interesting. Also, the way people interpret or perceive him due to this divide and how he outwardly shows himself. He gives a bit of insight with this one line saying, "Those less gifted have no choice but to walk alone, enduring a lifetime of tumbles and triumphs." In my opinion, this infers that Ratio dealt with that. This otherness where he's too smart to fit in with like the ordinary person, but where he's not smart enough to fit in with the geniuses. The othering and loneliness of not fitting in is something autistic people can relate to so much. I'm not saying that we can't fit in, because if you find your own community, I'll talk about this with another character. You can find your own community and fit in, but a lot of autistic people feel this. A lot of autistic people feel like they're on the outside looking in and can't exactly like get to the inside. Like there's this loneliness that a lot of people with autism can relate to that I feel Dr. Ratio expresses really well. And last but not least, we have Dan Hong.
Weren't their coordinates sent out from the space station?
Who cares? They're here and alive. Do they look like a mannequin to you?
Weak heartbeat and pulse. March, you better do CPR.
Huh? I've never done it before. Dan Hung, you do it. Wait, stop it! They're awake!
Y'all know that I love this man, so I may be a little bit biased in saying that he has autistic traits. But I mean, look at, I have him on my skin forever. Listen, I was looking at Dan Hong and like, I feel is one of the more accurate depictions of autism in Honkai Star Rail because he's not a genius. He doesn't have 8 PhDs. He didn't recreate an emanator for the lulz. He's just a little ragtag member of the Astral Express who lives in the archives, you know? I'm not saying he's not smart, just saying that he's not like Herta, Dr. Ratio, Ruan May smart, you know? So I wasn't sure about adding Dan Hung to this. Like, I personally relate to him a lot, but I didn't know if me thinking he shows autistic traits is just me being biased or if they actually were there. So I asked some people and they said I should totally mention him. It's not explicitly stated whether or not Dan Hung struggles with social interaction, but in comparison to March or Trailblazer, he's definitely more on the awkward side. There's many cases where Dan Hung will just stay quiet rather than say anything, and when he does socialize, he gets kind of straight to the point. One could also say Dan Hung speaks almost overly polite to strangers. As mentioned before with Ruan May and Dr. Ratio, there are a lot of stereotypes surrounding autism and being like cold or aloof or emotionless, which could compare to how a lot of other characters say that Dan Heng is like icy or cold, like Cold Dragon Young. But then March, one of the characters who knows Dan Heng best, says, quote unquote, he's not icy, he's nerdy. Relate so much, queen. Dan Heng seems to have a very specific interest in the archives, or maybe just of knowledge in general. I mean, he literally lives in the archive room. He says, quote unquote, it's easy to lose track of time in the archives, which you compare to when neurodivergent people have fixations. You could also maybe say the archives are a special interest for him. Also, the routine he has of archive work kind of fits an autistic, like, rigid routine. His relationship to the archives just reminds me of like the rigid schedule I feel I need, you know? Also, him retreating to the archive room could also be hyper or hypo-reactivity to sensory input. Like if something's too much for him, he goes to the archive room to get away from like the hustle and bustle of the Astral Express. There's even a line where he mentions, quote unquote, not entering the archives because it's not a place for chit chat. So as I said before, I believe Dan Heng is probably one of the best autistic representations in this game. I know that sounds crazy when it's compared to Ruan May or Dr.ratio or something, but it's just, in comparison to all the savants that are in this, or the savants that are in this, Dan Heng is just a refreshing character who displays some issues socially and who has preservative interests and needs to be away from the hustle and bustle and needs to like get away and be by himself. And I think it's how you would see an autistic person in real life rather than someone who has 8 PhDs and created an emanator for the lulz. He's just a nerd who was exiled and found himself on the Astro Express, and I think he found a place where he belongs, and I think that's a great notion to like end this video on. Whereas Dr. Ratio feels othered and like an outsider, Dan Heng has his own ragtag group of misfits who understand him and care for him, and I think everyone deserves to have that. So yeah, I love the view of Dan Heng being autistic because it shows that you don't have to be some super genius who knows everything and like Sherlock. And I think Dan Heng shows that like you don't need to have superpowers to be autistic and be accepted. I hope you like this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if I missed anyone, because I probably totally did. Also, don't mention Scrulium. I know I missed him and he's in the Genius Society. I just didn't know enough information on him to add him here. So I'll see you next time. Comment below with other ideas for video essays if you want me to look into stuff. Just kidding. I only will be able to make a video on something I'm fixated on. Okay, I hope you like this video. I'm very excited to record it and I'm very excited to post it. So I hope you like it. Okay. See you next time. Bye.